I never imagined that moving to a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona would turn my peaceful retirement plans into a full-blown war with a power-hungry homeowners association. But here I was, standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, watching security footage of a middle-aged woman in a fluorescent yellow vest scaling my grandfather's newly installed perimeter fence. My name is Frank Zimmerman, and 3 months ago I bought this beautiful Spanish-style house on 2 acres at the edge of Sunset Ridge Estates. The property had everything I wanted after 25 years of working construction in Phoenix: space, privacy, and enough room for my grandfather Walter to move in with me. At 78, Grandpa Walt had been living alone in Tucson, and after his second hip replacement, we both agreed it was time for him to have family close by. What I didn't know was that the HOA president, a woman named Brenda Kensington, considered herself the supreme ruler of our neighborhood and had very specific ideas about what constituted acceptable property modifications. The trouble started 2 weeks after Grandpa Walt moved in. He took one look at the open yard and shook his head. "Frank, we're sitting ducks out here. Anyone could just waltz right up to the house." I tried to explain that we lived in a gated community with security patrols, but my grandfather had spent 30 years as a military police officer at Fort Huachuca, and old habits died hard. Within days, he had designed a 6-foot wrought iron fence to run along the back and side property lines, leaving the front open to comply with HOA regulations about street visibility. I pulled the permits from the city of Scottsdale, checked the HOA covenants twice, and confirmed that perimeter fencing was allowed as long as it didn't exceed 6 feet and maintained the approved color scheme of black or bronze. Grandpa Walt chose black, and we hired a local contractor to install it professionally. The fence looked sharp, matched the Spanish architecture, and most importantly, gave my grandfather peace of mind. Brenda Kensington had other opinions. She appeared at my door 3 days after installation, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair sprayed into a helmet that probably could have survived a Category 5 hurricane. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm here about your unauthorized fence." I blinked at her. "It's not unauthorized. I have city permits and it complies with the HOA covenants. Would you like to see the documentation?" "The Architectural Review Committee never approved this," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Section 12, paragraph 4 of the covenants clearly states that any exterior modifications require committee approval before installation. I had read Section 12, paragraph 4. That section refers to modifications visible from the street. The fence is on the back and side property lines. The covenants explicitly allow perimeter fencing up to 6 feet without pre-approval. Brenda's face flushed red. "I am the president of this HOA and chair of the Architectural Review Committee. I decide what requires approval, and I say your fence needs to be reviewed. You have 14 days to submit an application, or you'll face daily fines of $100. She spun on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus before I could respond. I stood there holding my coffee mug, trying to process what had just happened. Grandpa Walt appeared behind me, leaning on his cane. "That woman's got a stick up her rear end the size of a telephone pole." "She can't actually fine us," I said, more to convince myself than him. "The fence is legal." But Brenda could, and she did. 7 days later, I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA was imposing daily fines of $100 starting immediately. I called an attorney that afternoon. Jessica Morton specialized in HOA disputes and listened patiently while I explained the situation. "Do you have copies of the permits and the relevant covenant sections?" she asked. "Everything. I documented it all before we started." "Good. Send me the documents and I'll draft a response. HOAs like to bully homeowners, but they're not above the law. If your fence complies with the written covenants, they don't have a leg to stand on." Jessica filed a formal objection to the fines and requested a hearing with the HOA board. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which meant the fines would theoretically accumulate to over $4,000 by then. "Don't pay anything," Jessica advised. "Once we prove the fines are baseless, they'll have to reverse them." In the meantime, Grandpa Walt had been busy. He didn't trust Brenda or her threats, and he especially didn't like the fact that HOA patrol vehicles had started driving slowly past our house at odd hours. "They're casing us," he muttered one evening, watching through the front window as a white SUV with an HOA logo crept by for the 3rd time that day. "Grandpa, they're just doing their rounds." 3 times in one afternoon? That's not rounds, that's surveillance. He tapped his cane against the floor. "I'm setting up some security measures." I should have paid more attention to what that meant. Grandpa Walt had always been handy with electronics and security systems. During his MP days, he had trained in perimeter security and intrusion detection. I assumed he was going to install some cameras and motion sensor lights, which seemed reasonable given Brenda's escalating hostility. The day before our HOA board hearing, I came home from a supply run to find Grandpa Walt in the backyard with what looked like a complex irrigation system. PVC pipes ran along the inside of the fence at strategic intervals, connected to a central control box mounted on the back wall of the house. "What's all this?" I asked. "Motion-activated sprinkler system," he said cheerfully. "Completely legal, totally harmless. If anyone comes over that fence uninvited, they get a surprise shower." I examined the setup more closely. The motion sensors were positioned along the fence line, angled to detect anyone climbing over. The sprinkler heads were commercial grade, the kind used for large landscaping projects. "Isn't this a bit much?" "You know what's too much? That Kensington woman threatening us with illegal fines and sending her goon squad to intimidate us. This is just good property security." He patted the control box affectionately. "Besides, I added some special features. The water pressure is adjustable, and I rigged up a few extra nozzles for maximum coverage. Anyone who decides to hop our fence is going to regret it." "As long as it's just water," I said, though part of me was already imagining the look on Brenda's face if she got drenched. "Just water," Grandpa Walt confirmed. "Cold water, from the outdoor tap, which in Arizona in November gets pretty chilly overnight." The HOA board hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the community center. Jessica arrived early to review our presentation, and we had every document organized in a 3-ring binder: city permits, covenant excerpts, photographs of the fence, and comparable fences in the neighborhood that had never been challenged. "This is straightforward," Jessica said. "They have no case." The board consisted of 5 members: Brenda Kensington as president, a treasurer named Harold Schmidt, a secretary named Patricia Vance, and 2 at-large members whose names I didn't catch. They sat behind a long table like a tribunal, with Brenda in the center position. About 20 other homeowners had shown up to watch, which surprised me until I realized that Brenda had made enemies all over the neighborhood with her aggressive enforcement tactics. Jessica presented our case methodically, walking through each covenant section and showing how the fence complied with every requirement. She produced photos of 4 other houses in Sunset Ridge Estates with similar or identical fencing that had never been challenged. She cited Arizona state law regarding HOA authority and pointed out that selective enforcement violated fair housing principles. Brenda listened with her arms crossed, her expression growing more pinched with each piece of evidence. When Jessica finished, Brenda leaned forward. "The Architectural Review Committee has the discretionary authority to determine what constitutes a modification requiring pre-approval. Mr. Zimmerman's fence represents a significant visual change to the property." "From where?" Jessica asked calmly. "The fence is not visible from any public street or common area. The covenants specifically exempt perimeter fencing from pre-approval requirements. Your discretionary authority doesn't override written covenant provisions." Harold Schmidt, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "Ms. Morton makes a valid point, Brenda. I reviewed the covenants myself, and I don't see how we can justify the fines." Brenda shot him a look that could have melted steel. "The committee's decision is final." "Actually, it's not," Jessica said. "State law allows homeowners to appeal HOA decisions to binding arbitration or court. But I'd prefer we settle this reasonably tonight. Reverse the fines, acknowledge that the fence complies with the covenants, and we all move on." The board members huddled together, whispering urgently. I could see Brenda arguing, her face flushed, while Harold and Patricia shook their heads. Finally, Patricia spoke. "The board votes to reverse the fines against Mr. Zimmerman and recognize that his perimeter fence complies with current covenant provisions." Brenda's jaw tightened. "I vote against." "The motion carries 4-1, Patricia said, making a note. We left the community center victorious, but I noticed Brenda standing in the parking lot with 2 men in HOA patrol uniforms, speaking in low, urgent tones. Grandpa Walt noticed too. "That woman doesn't give up easy." The board voted against her. It's over. Maybe legally, Grandpa Walt said, but that doesn't mean she's done. He was right. 3 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, I woke to the sound of high-pressure water spraying and someone screaming. I bolted out of bed and ran to the back window. The motion-activated sprinklers were going full blast, and illuminated in the security lights were 2 figures in yellow HOA patrol vests, soaking wet and scrambling back over the fence. One of them slipped and fell into a puddle, cursing loudly. Grandpa Walt appeared beside me, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Works like a charm. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app. The footage showed everything in crystal-clear detail. At 2:27 a.m., 2 HOA patrol officers had approached the back fence. They spent several minutes examining it with flashlights. Then one of them produced a camera and started taking photographs. Not satisfied with shooting from outside, the taller one had climbed over the fence, followed by his partner. The moment their feet touched ground on our property, the motion sensors triggered, and industrial-strength sprinkler heads unleashed a deluge of cold water at high pressure. The first guy took a direct hit to the chest and went down like he'd been tackled. The second one tried to run but slipped on the wet grass. They both scrambled for the fence, clawing their way back over while the sprinklers tracked their movement. The whole incident lasted maybe 45 seconds, but the footage was comedy gold. "They were trespassing," Grandpa Walt said, his voice suddenly serious. "On private property, after midnight, without permission or cause. That's criminal trespass in Arizona." I replayed the footage, my initial amusement fading as the legal implications sank in. Why would they do this? The board already ruled in our favor. Because Brenda sent them. She wanted evidence that the fence was somehow dangerous or non-compliant. She was going to manufacture a violation. He pointed at the screen. "See how they're taking photos? They were documenting whatever they could find. Probably planned to claim the fence exceeded height limits or some other nonsense." I saved the footage to 3 separate locations and sent a copy to Jessica Morton with a timestamp and explanation. She called me at 8 a.m. "Frank, this is bad. For them, I mean. Criminal trespass is a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona. If they were acting under Brenda's orders, she could face conspiracy charges. What should I do? File a police report. Today. The HOA and its agents don't have the authority to enter private property without permission, emergency, or a court order. They violated the law, and you have video proof." I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department that morning and filed a formal trespassing complaint. The officer who took my report, a detective named Mills, watched the security footage twice. "You said these are HOA patrol officers?" "Yes, sir. The HOA for Sunset Ridge Estates employs private security to patrol the community. But our property is gated and fenced. There was no emergency and no invitation." Detective Mills made notes. "And this sprinkler system, it's just water?" "Yes, sir. Motion-activated landscaping sprinklers. My grandfather installed them for security after we had issues with the HOA harassing us." He nodded slowly. "Okay. We'll follow up with the HOA and identify these individuals. You'll receive a case number for your records." Word spread fast in Sunset Ridge Estates. By that afternoon, my neighbor Tom Hendricks came over to ask if the rumors were true. "Did Brenda really send patrol guys to break into your yard?" "They hopped the fence at 2:30 in the morning," I confirmed. "I've got video." Tom whistled. "Man, she's really lost it. She fined us $500 last year because our Christmas lights were up until January 3rd. Said they violated the holiday decoration timeline." Over the next few days, I heard similar stories from at least a dozen neighbors. Brenda had been terrorizing the community for 3 years with arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and increasingly authoritarian interpretations of the covenants. People were afraid to push back because fighting the HOA meant legal fees and prolonged disputes. But this trespassing incident was different. It was criminal, and I had undeniable proof. Detective Mills called me 5 days later. "Mr. Zimmerman, we've identified the 2 patrol officers from your video. They're contracted security through a company called Sentinel Guard Services. We interviewed both of them, and they've confirmed that HOA President Brenda Kensington specifically instructed them to access your property to document alleged covenant violations." "So what happens now?" We're charging both officers with criminal trespass. Because they were acting under orders from Ms. Kensington, we're also charging her with criminal conspiracy to commit trespass. She'll be issued a summons to appear in court." I thanked Detective Mills and immediately called Jessica Morton. "This is good," she said. "Criminal charges will put pressure on the HOA board to remove Brenda from her position. You might also consider a civil lawsuit for harassment and invasion of privacy." "I just want this to be over," I admitted. "I just want to live peacefully in my house." "Then let the criminal case play out. If Brenda's convicted, the board will have grounds to remove her, and the HOA's insurance will likely settle any civil claims to avoid further litigation." The news hit the neighborhood like a bomb. Within 24 hours, a petition started circulating to recall Brenda from the HOA board. Arizona law allows homeowners to recall board members with a majority vote, and the petition gathered signatures faster than anyone expected. People who had been silently suffering under Brenda's reign were suddenly speaking up, sharing their stories, and demanding change. Brenda fought back the only way she knew how: more aggression. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners, claiming that I had installed a dangerous booby trap on my property and that the sprinkler system constituted a hazard. She threatened to pursue legal action against me for reckless endangerment of HOA personnel. Jessica drafted a cease and desist letter within hours, pointing out that Brenda's accusations were defamatory and that motion-activated sprinklers were legal, common, and in no way hazardous. She also noted that Brenda was facing criminal charges and advised her to stop all communication about the matter. Brenda ignored the advice. 2 days later, she showed up at my door again, this time with a man she introduced as her attorney, Douglas Freeman. "Mr. Zimmerman, my client is prepared to drop all previous fines and concerns about your fence in exchange for you dropping the criminal charges." I looked at Douglas Freeman, who had the uncomfortable expression of a lawyer who knows his client doesn't have a case. "Mr. Freeman, I didn't file criminal charges. The Scottsdale Police Department filed them after investigating a crime. I can't drop them even if I wanted to." "You could decline to cooperate with the prosecution," Brenda snapped. "I could," I agreed, "but I won't. Your patrol officers trespassed on my property in the middle of the night under your direction. That's a crime, and you need to face the consequences." Freeman put a hand on Brenda's arm as she started to respond. "Ms. Kensington, we should go." They left, and I watched them argue in my driveway for a solid 5 minutes before Brenda finally got in her car and roared off. Freeman stood there looking tired, then walked back to my door. "Off the record, Mr. Zimmerman, you're doing this community a favor. Brenda Kensington has abused her authority for years, and it's about time someone held her accountable." "You're her attorney," I said, surprised. "Not for much longer. I've advised her repeatedly to resign and settle this quietly. She refuses to listen." He handed me his card. "If you do decide to pursue civil action, call me. I might be able to help from the other side." The recall petition reached the required threshold within 2 weeks. A special meeting was scheduled to vote on Brenda's removal from the board. According to the HOA bylaws, a simple majority of voting homeowners could remove a board member for cause, and criminal charges definitely qualified as cause. The meeting was packed. The community center held maybe 150 people, and there had to be 200 homeowners crammed inside, with more standing outside. Brenda sat at the board table, stone-faced, while Harold Schmidt presided over the proceedings. "We're here to vote on a recall petition against Board President Brenda Kensington. The floor is open for comments." What followed was 2 hours of testimony that ranged from heartbreaking to infuriating. A retired schoolteacher described being fined $1,000 because her mailbox had a small dent. A young couple explained how Brenda had threatened to foreclose on their home over a dispute about their lawn irrigation schedule. An elderly man recounted being cited for parking his car in his own driveway overnight because Brenda claimed it was unsightly. Through it all, Brenda sat silent, her expression never changing. When the comment period ended, Harold called for the vote. "All homeowners in favor of recalling Brenda Kensington from the board, please raise your hands." A forest of hands shot up. Harold counted carefully, then recounted. All opposed? Maybe 10 hands went up, mostly people who looked related to Brenda. Harold made the final tally. The motion to recall passes with 163 votes in favor and 9 opposed. Brenda Kensington is hereby removed from the HOA board effective immediately. Brenda stood up, grabbed her papers, and walked out without a word. I expected her to say something, to rage or protest, but she just left. The community center erupted in applause. Harold Schmidt was elected interim president, and one of his first acts was to send a formal letter to every homeowner apologizing for the HOA's previous overreach and promising reforms. He also suspended all outstanding fines pending individual review by the new board. But the criminal case was still pending. Brenda's court date was set for late January. Jessica advised me that I would likely be called as a witness, along with the 2 patrol officers. The prosecution has your video evidence and the officers' statements. It's a strong case. I didn't hear anything from Brenda for 6 weeks. Then, 2 days before her court date, she showed up at my house again. This time she was alone, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years. "Mr. Zimmerman, can I speak with you?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in the living room, and for a long moment, she just stared at her hands. "I'm going to plead guilty," she finally said. "My attorney worked out an agreement with the prosecutor. I'll get probation and community service, no jail time." "Okay," I said, not sure why she was telling me this. "I need you to understand something. I wasn't trying to hurt you or your grandfather. I was trying to maintain standards in this community. Property values, aesthetic consistency, it matters." "You sent people to break into my yard in the middle of the night," I said quietly. "You tried to fine me thousands of dollars for a legal fence. You harassed dozens of people over trivial things. That's not maintaining standards. That's abusing power." Her face flushed. "I dedicated 3 years to this HOA. I volunteered my time, my energy, my expertise, and people fought me every step of the way. Because you treated them like subjects instead of neighbors." I stood up. "I appreciate you telling me about the plea deal, but I think you should go." She left without another word. 2 days later, the Scottsdale court confirmed that Brenda Kensington had pled guilty to conspiracy to commit criminal trespass. She received 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The 2 patrol officers who actually climbed the fence received similar probation sentences and lost their security licenses. Sentinel Guard Services terminated their contracts with several HOAs in the area after the incident became public. Life in Sunset Ridge Estates slowly returned to normal, or at least a better version of normal. Harold Schmidt turned out to be a reasonable HOA president who actually read the covenants before making decisions. The new board established an appeals process for fines and created clear guidelines for what required architectural review committee approval. Grandpa Walt's motion, activated sprinkler system, became legendary in the neighborhood. At least 3 other homeowners asked him to install similar setups on their properties. He was happy to oblige, and pretty soon he had a little side business going. "Never thought I'd be a security consultant at 78, he joked while working on Tom Hendricks's fence line. I ran into Douglas Freeman, Brenda's former attorney, at a local coffee shop 3 months after everything settled. He confirmed that Brenda had moved out of Sunset Ridge Estates and bought a condo in Phoenix. "She's actually better off," he said. "The HOA presidency consumed her life. She couldn't separate her identity from her position, and it made her increasingly irrational." "Think she learned anything from this?" I asked. Freeman shrugged. "Hard to say. Some people are incapable of self-reflection, but at least she can't hurt anyone else in an HOA context." Spring came to Arizona, and my grandfather's sprinkler system proved useful for more than just security. The motion sensors could be adjusted to ignore small animals, but they still triggered for anything human-sized. One afternoon, a door-to-door salesman decided to cut through our backyard instead of using the front walk. The sprinklers gave him a thorough soaking, and Grandpa Walt laughed so hard he had to sit down. "You know, Frank," he said after catching his breath, "when you invited me to move in, I worried I'd be a burden, that I'd just be sitting around waiting to die." "Grandpa, you could never be a burden." "Let me finish," he said, smiling. "What I'm saying is, this whole mess with Brenda and the HOA, it gave me purpose again. I got to use my old skills, protect our home, and even help some neighbors. That sprinkler system is the most fun I've had in years." I hugged him. this tough old military cop who had faced down criminals and bureaucrats with equal determination. "I'm glad you're here, Grandpa. I couldn't have dealt with any of this without you." The civil lawsuit came later, almost as an afterthought. Jessica Morton filed a harassment and invasion of privacy claim against the HOA, seeking damages for emotional distress and legal fees. The HOA's insurance company settled within 6 weeks for $25,000 and a written apology from the board. I used the money to pay Jessica's fees, donate to a local veterans charity in Grandpa Walt's name, and install a beautiful patio area in the backyard where we could actually enjoy the property we'd fought so hard to protect. Tom Hendricks organized a neighborhood barbecue that summer, and nearly 40 families showed up. It was the first time in years that Sunset Ridge Estates had felt like an actual community instead of a collection of houses ruled by fear. Kids played in the common areas without worrying about being cited for noise violations. People decorated their homes for holidays without checking 17 different covenant sections. The HOA still existed and still enforced reasonable rules, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Harold Schmidt gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition. "We lost our way for a while," he said. "We forgot that an HOA is supposed to serve the homeowners, not control them. Thanks to Frank Zimmerman and his grandfather Walter for reminding us what it means to stand up for what's right." People clapped, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I didn't want to be a symbol or a hero. I just wanted to live in peace. But Grandpa Walt elbowed me and whispered, "Take the credit, kid. You earned it." Later that evening, as the sun set over the Arizona desert and turned the sky brilliant shades of orange and purple, I sat on my new patio with Grandpa Walt. The sprinkler system was active, its sensors watching the perimeter silently. Inside the house, the security footage from that night in November was saved and backed up, a reminder of how quickly peace could be disrupted and how important it was to defend your rights. "You think we've seen the last of Brenda?" I asked. Grandpa Walt sipped his iced tea and considered the question. "Probably. People like her need power over others to feel important. She lost that power, and I doubt she'll risk getting it back. But if she ever does show up again, we've got your sprinklers ready." I laughed, but part of me knew he was serious. The system had become more than just a security measure. It was a symbol of our refusal to be intimidated, our willingness to fight back against unjust authority, and our commitment to protecting our home and rights. The legal aftermath continued for months in small ways. The Scottsdale Police Department used our case as a training example for HOA overreach and property rights. Jessica Morton published an article about the case in an Arizona legal journal, helping other homeowners understand their rights when dealing with aggressive HOAs. Several local news stations covered the story, though I declined most interview requests. I didn't want fame or attention. I just wanted the message to get out that HOAs aren't above the law. One unexpected consequence was the number of people who reached out to me for advice. I received emails and phone calls from homeowners across Arizona dealing with similar HOA nightmares. I wasn't a lawyer and couldn't give legal advice, but I shared Jessica Morton's contact information and told them about my experience. Several of those people successfully fought back against abusive HOAs, and a few sent thank you notes saying that my story had given them the courage to stand up for themselves. Grandpa Walt's sprinkler business grew steadily. He partnered with a local contractor and developed a standardized installation package for motion-activated security sprinklers. They marketed it as a humane alternative to dogs or electric fences, perfect for desert properties where water conservation was important. The system used recirculated water and smart sensors to minimize waste while maximizing security. Within 6 months, they had installed systems in 30 homes across the greater Phoenix area. Who knew getting soaked would be such a popular security feature? Grandpa Walt joked while reviewing installation orders. The HOA board underwent additional changes as well. Patricia Vance was elected president after Harold Schmidt stepped down to focus on his health. Patricia immediately implemented new policies requiring transparency in all board decisions and limiting the circumstances under which fines could be imposed. She also established a homeowner advisory committee to review proposed rule changes before they were implemented. I was asked to serve on that committee and reluctantly agreed. It met quarterly and provided a forum for homeowners to voice concerns before they escalated into full-blown conflicts. The meetings were sometimes tedious, but they prevented the kind of authoritarian overreach that had characterized Brenda's tenure. During one meeting, a homeowner complained about a neighbor's vegetable garden being visible from the street. Under Brenda, that would have resulted in immediate fines and demands for removal. Instead, Patricia asked the committee to review the covenant language about landscaping. We determined that vegetable gardens weren't specifically prohibited and that the existing garden was well maintained and attractive. The complaint was dismissed, and the homeowner with the garden sent a grateful email to the entire committee. Those small victories mattered. They represented a shift from rule by fear to governance by consensus. The HOA still had authority, but it exercised that authority reasonably and with respect for homeowners' rights. Brenda's probation ended after 18 months, and I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had completed her community service at a local food bank. Part of me wondered if the experience had changed her perspective, but I never tried to find out. Some chapters in life are better left closed. The anniversary of the fence installation came and went. Grandpa Walt and I stood in the backyard admiring his handiwork. The wrought iron still looked pristine, and the sprinkler system had never malfunctioned. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he asked. "What's that?" We didn't back down. We could have torn down the fence, paid the fines, apologized, and made our lives easier. But we stood our ground because we were right. That matters, Frank. It matters more than peace if peace means surrendering your principles. He was right, of course. The fight had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But it had also been necessary. And in the end, we hadn't just won for ourselves. We'd changed the entire community for the better. 2 years after the initial incident, Sunset Ridge Estates was unrecognizable from the oppressive environment Brenda had created. Property values had actually increased because people wanted to live in a community with a reasonable HOA. New families moved in and commented on how welcoming the neighborhood felt. The common areas were used for community events instead of being sterile, empty spaces that no one dared to use for fear of citations. I refinanced my mortgage and used some of the equity to build a workshop for Grandpa Walt's sprinkler business. He was 80 now, but showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, he had more energy than ever, fueled by the satisfaction of helping people protect their homes and property rights. Jessica Morton became a good friend beyond her role as my attorney. She specialized in HOA law and used the publicity from our case to build a practice dedicated to helping homeowners fight abusive associations. She won several significant cases and helped change Arizona state law to increase oversight of HOAs and limit their ability to impose excessive fines. One evening, she stopped by the house to drop off some documents and ended up staying for dinner. Grandpa Walt grilled steaks while we sat on the patio, and the conversation turned to how much had changed since that first confrontation with Brenda. "You know what the most satisfying part of all this is?" Jessica said. "It's not the legal victories or the settlements. It's the fact that you created a blueprint for other homeowners. You showed people that they don't have to accept abuse from their HOAs, that they have rights and legal remedies." "I just wanted to keep my fence," I said. "That's how it always starts," she replied. "One person refusing to be pushed around, and that refusal becomes a movement." I thought about all the people who had reached out to me, all the homeowners who had found the courage to challenge their own abusive HOAs. Jessica was right. What had started as a personal dispute over a fence had become something larger, something meaningful. The sprinkler system triggered occasionally, usually from wildlife or the occasional trespasser who didn't realize our property was private. Each time, Grandpa Walt would check the security footage and chuckle at whoever had gotten soaked. "Never gets old," he'd say. We had one more encounter with an HOA patrol officer, but this time it was entirely different. A new security company had been hired, and one of their officers was doing his rounds when he noticed our sprinkler setup. He knocked on the door politely and introduced himself. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm Officer Garcia with Mesa Security Services. I noticed your motion-activated sprinkler system, and I wanted to let you know that our team has been briefed about it. We won't be entering your property without your explicit permission." I appreciated the professionalism. Thank you, Officer Garcia. I'm glad your company understands property boundaries. We learned from what happened with the previous company, he said. That kind of mistake isn't just unprofessional, it's criminal. We take our responsibilities seriously, and that includes respecting homeowner rights. After he left, Grandpa Walt nodded approvingly. Now that's how you run a security patrol, with common sense and respect. The third anniversary of moving to Sunset Ridge Estates arrived, and I reflected on everything that had happened. The house was exactly what I'd wanted, a peaceful refuge with space, privacy, and room for family. The journey to get there had been rocky, but the destination was worth it. Grandpa Walt's health remained good despite his age. The physical activity from his sprinkler business kept him active, and the sense of purpose kept his mind sharp. We talked often about how lucky we were, not just to have won our fight with the HOA, but to have found meaning and community in the process. Patricia Vance stepped down as HOA president after 2 successful terms, and the election to replace her was refreshingly drama-free. A retired accountant named Richard Chen won, running on a platform of maintaining the reforms that had been implemented. His first act as president was to create a memorial garden in the common area dedicated to good governance and community spirit. During the dedication ceremony, Richard gave a speech about the importance of balance in HOA management. We need rules to maintain property values and community standards, he said. But those rules must be enforced fairly, reasonably, and with respect for individual homeowners. The last 3 years have taught us that an HOA can be effective without being oppressive. I thought about Brenda Kensington, wherever she was, and wondered if she understood what she had lost. Not just her position or her power, but the opportunity to lead a community with wisdom and compassion. She had chosen control over collaboration, fear over respect, and it had cost her everything. But that was her story, not mine. My story was about standing up for what was right, protecting my home and family, and building a better community in the process. It was about Grandpa Walt's ingenuity, Jessica Morton's dedication, and the courage of dozens of neighbors who refused to accept abuse. The fence still stood, black wrought iron gleaming in the Arizona sun. The sprinkler system still monitored the perimeter, ready to defend our property with nothing more harmful than cold water. And inside the house, Grandpa Walt and I lived peacefully, knowing that we had fought the good fight and won. Sometimes I would walk the property line and remember that night when the HOA patrol officers climbed over, expecting to find violations and instead finding a face full of water. I would remember Brenda's fury, the board meetings, the legal battles, and the slow transformation of Sunset Ridge Estates from a tyrannical regime to a genuine community. Every fence tells a story. Mine told a story of rights defended, bullies defeated, and a grandfather's love expressed through motion-activated sprinklers. It wasn't the story I expected when I moved to Scottsdale, but it was a story worth telling. Grandpa Walt joined me on one of those walks, leaning on his cane and surveying his handiwork with pride. You know, Frank, I've been thinking about writing a book, a guide for homeowners dealing with aggressive HOAs. Think anyone would read it? Grandpa, based on how many people have asked me for advice, I think you'd have a bestseller. He grinned. Better get started then. I'll call it Motion-Activated Justice, How to Defend Your Rights Without Breaking the Law. I laughed, but he was serious. Over the next 6 months, Grandpa Walt actually wrote the book. It was part memoir, part legal guide, part technical manual for home security systems. Jessica Morton helped with the legal sections, and I helped with editing and organization. We self-published it online, not expecting much beyond maybe helping a few people. The book sold 5,000 copies in the first month. Reviews poured in from homeowners across the country who had dealt with similar HOA nightmares. Grandpa Walt did interviews with local media and even appeared on a national podcast about property rights. At 81, he became something of a minor celebrity in the HOA resistance movement. Never thought I'd be famous for getting people wet, he joked during one interview. The publicity brought more business to his sprinkler installation company, and he hired 2 employees to help with the workload. The business became profitable enough that Grandpa Walt started donating a portion of the proceeds to legal aid organizations that helped low-income homeowners fight unjust HOA actions. Life had a funny way of turning disasters into opportunities. What started as harassment from an out-of-control HOA president had evolved into a business, a book, a movement, and a genuine community transformation. I couldn't have planned any of it, but I was grateful for all of it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 4 years after the fence installation. Arizona passed new legislation strengthening homeowner protections against abusive HOAs. The law limited the fines that associations could impose, required detailed documentation before any enforcement action, and created a state-level oversight board to investigate complaints. Jessica Morton had lobbied for the legislation, and she invited Grandpa Walt and me to the signing ceremony at the state capitol in Phoenix. Governor Sarah Reeves spoke about the need to balance HOA authority with individual rights. Homeowners associations serve an important purpose, she said, but like any organization with power, they must be held accountable. This legislation ensures that HOAs operate transparently, fairly, and within the bounds of the law. After the ceremony, several legislators came over to thank Grandpa Walt for his advocacy. One representative from Tucson shook his hand vigorously. "Your book and your testimony really helped us understand what homeowners are facing. This law is going to protect thousands of people from the kind of abuse you experienced." Driving home from Phoenix, Grandpa Walt was quiet. Finally, he said, "You know, Frank, I spent 30 years as an MP enforcing rules and regulations. I believed in order, in structure, in following the law. But this whole experience taught me that sometimes the law needs to change, and sometimes the people enforcing the rules are the ones breaking them. You made a difference, Grandpa. A real difference." "We made a difference," he corrected. "You're the one who refused to take down that fence. You're the one who stood up to Brenda. I just added some water pressure." We both laughed, and I realized how far we had come from that first confrontation with Brenda Kensington. What could have been a bitter, divisive experience had instead brought us closer together, strengthened our community, and helped change state law for the better. The years that followed were peaceful. The HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas, enforcing reasonable rules, and respecting homeowner rights. New families moved into Sunset Ridge estates and often commented on how friendly and welcoming the neighborhood felt. They had no idea of the battles that had been fought to create that environment. Grandpa Walt's sprinkler business continued to thrive. He celebrated his 85th birthday by installing his 500th system, this one for a veteran in Mesa who was dealing with an aggressive HOA of his own. "Pass it forward," Grandpa Walt told him. "Someone helped you, so you help someone else." I thought about that philosophy often. We had been helped by Jessica Morton, by supportive neighbors, by fair-minded board members like Harold Schmidt and Patricia Vance. And in turn, we had helped others through Grandpa Walt's book, through the legal precedent our case set, and through the state legislation that followed. One quiet evening in late autumn, exactly 5 years after the HOA patrol officers had climbed our fence and gotten soaked, Grandpa Walt and I sat on the patio watching the sunset. The sprinkler system hummed softly in standby mode, ever vigilant. The fence stood strong and unblemished. The property was everything we had wanted it to be, peaceful, secure, and truly ours. "You ever regret it?" I asked. "All the fighting, the stress, the legal battles?" Grandpa Walt shook his head firmly. "Not for a second. Some things are worth fighting for, Frank. Your home, your rights, your dignity. If we hadn't fought, Brenda would still be terrorizing people, and nothing would have changed." He was right, as usual. The fight had been necessary, and the results spoke for themselves. Sunset Ridge Estates was a better place because we had refused to back down. Arizona was a better place because the laws had changed. And Grandpa Walt and I had a deeper bond because we had faced adversity together and won. The motion-activated sprinklers remained a legend in the neighborhood. New homeowners would hear the story and laugh, picturing the HOA patrol officers scrambling over the fence in the middle of the night, soaked and defeated. It became a symbol of resistance against overreach, a reminder that ordinary people could stand up to bullies and win. As darkness fell and the desert air cooled, I thought about writing down our story properly, not just as a legal case or a chapter in Grandpa Walt's book, but as a complete narrative. A story about fences and sprinklers, about tyranny and justice, about a grandfather and grandson who defended their home and changed their community. But for now, it was enough to sit in the peace we had fought for, watching the stars emerge over Arizona, knowing that our fence stood strong and our rights were secure. The battle was over, the victory was complete, and the future was bright. Grandpa Walt raised his glass of iced tea in a toast. To fences, to sprinklers, and to never backing down from what's right. I clinked my glass against his. To home, to family, and to motion-activated justice. We drank, we laughed, and we enjoyed the evening. Two men who had faced down an HOA tyrant and won, not with violence or aggression, but with legal rights, cold water, and the courage to stand firm. It was a good story, a true story, and one that would be told in Sunset Ridge Estates for generations to come.